Welcome to the Subconscious Mind Mastery Podcast. Thomas Miller coming to you from Lord Jupiter in Central Florida. Been sitting here by a lake all week and getting ready to move back over to hang out with my brother for a couple of more days. I had the privilege of interviewing Ray Merriman. Now, those of you who are regulars on the Fun Astrology podcast, this is the same interview, so if you've heard it there, you don't need to listen to it here. But for those of you who are not into the astrology, I really thought that you would be interested in this regardless, because he talks about something that even Fred Dodson talks about, parallel timelines going into 2023, 24, 25, based on his analysis of cycles and also of the indicators in the sky. You don't have to study financial astrology very long before you come across Ray's name. He holds a unique space in the analysis of financial astrology that is uniquely his. I had the recent privilege of narrating 2 audiobooks for Ray and his organization. One is an annual book that they put out. It's called Forecast 2023. It's a mundane look at everything that is in the sky that could affect us here on planet Earth over the next 12 months. It's a mundane analysis, far more than a financial analysis. There is the second component that you can get from his website that also includes the financial forecast for this year, but the audiobook part is purely mundane. The second book is called Trends 2023. He talks about the details of trends toward the end of the interview. It looks at your sun sign from an overview perspective, and then career and finances, love and relationships, health and spirituality. All the key areas of astrology, right? Well, both books are out. They are available on Audible and on Apple Books. And I always like to remind people, no, you do not need a subscription to purchase books on Audible. They just make it look like you do. And I found Apple Books to be a couple of dollars cheaper. When Ray agreed to do this interview, I really didn't have any expectations. It was our first time to talk in person. And I have to say, whatever I expected, this exceeded it probably 10,000 times. Ray mentions a few things in this interview that are critical to understanding not the next 12 months, probably more like the next 12 years. So let's jump in. Well, Ray, it's great talking to you. Thank you for stopping by.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited about our interview and podcast that we're just about to do. Thank you, Thomas.
Well, I know you've been doing this for a long time, and some people in our audience will not know the background of Ray Merriman. So can you just condense 50 years into 5 minutes or less?
I'll do my best. Well, let's see. I began astrology, studying it in 1966. A friend of mine came back from Haight-Ashbury at the time. I was a college student. He said, everybody out here talks about your sun sign. You meet everybody, they want to know what your sun sign is, what your astrology makeup is, sun, moon, and ascendant. So I thought that was interesting. He gave me a book by Ronald Davidson called Astrology, which is a good beginning book I'd highly recommend to anybody who's listening. That got me interested. At the time I was finishing my undergraduate study, about to be in graduate school in psychology at Michigan State University. From there, I decided to do a study on what I saw as a changing subculture in society. I believe that the people who were dropping out, turning on, and tuning in represented a subculture developing in 1966, 67. So I found a professor who would support a research project on that for my thesis. And I had to go around to, I had to get at least 100 people to take what's called the Milton Rokeach Value Survey. Dr. Rokeach was a famous psychologist at that time, wrote many books, and he was my sponsor. So it was hard to get at that time people who had turned on, tuned in, and dropped out to do a survey. They were suspicious of everybody. But every commune I went to, and that was the criteria, they had to live in communes and, subscribe to this idea of tuning in, turning on, and dropping out. Every commune I went to is the same thing. What's your sun sign? What's your moon sign? What's your ascendant? And I thought, this is phenomenal. A whole subculture I thought was political, cultural, is actually interested in astrology and, of course, Far Eastern meditation. So that got me really, really interested to understand my generation, if you understand. And what we found was the results of this subculture, 100 people that got to take a survey, was totally off the charts in comparison to any other demographic he looked at. And he was really excited about it. But that's what got me launched in astrology in 1966, 67. The year after that, Circle Bookstores opened in Ann Arbor. So I spent my summers studying Dane Rudger, Mark Edmund Jones, Alan Leo, CEO Carter, all the great so-called founders of modern day astrology before our generation came up and made it more modern in astrology. I formed an organization called the Korean Revelation Center. In 1972, we had 12 conferences every year at Michigan State University, University of Michigan, Jesuit seminaries. And we grew from a metaphysical-based conference more and more into astrology as I got more and more involved in astrology. We had all the greats at that time coming to our conferences. And from that, at the very end, we had a core group that raised the money and became the catalyst for the forming of AFAN, the AFA network, which really then broke away from AFA and became its own organization, which led to the development of UAC, the United Astrology Congress, which is the most, I would think, respected and desirable conference to go to in astrology, maybe in the world. It used to happen every 3 years and 4 years. Now it's like every 6 years. So I've been involved in community work since 1971. I passed the AFA professional certification exam in 1971 or 72. I forget which. I was the youngest person ever to pass it at the time. I'm a certified astrology professional with ESAR. In 1978, 1979, one of my clients wanted to know if there's any correlation between astrology and the stock market. And she offered to sponsor me for a week, cover my expenses and all that, do a research on various corporations that her sponsor was interested in investing in. So they sent me away to a retired priest who lived in Saginaw, Michigan, Dr. Joe, and on his chicken farm, I proceeded to work for 5 days and study these 20 different companies and the incorporation dates that she gave me. And from that, I said, these 5 companies look pretty good. Why don't you invest in this now? This was March of 1978. And then take the positions off in September. I gave her a date in September. They did that with $10,000. They walked out with $12,800, which was a 28% return in a market that was going nowhere. It was basically sideways between 800 and 950 the whole time. So I was quite impressed with that. That really moved me. And thus began my involvement with what became the financial astrology renaissance. I went to Tucson, Arizona in 1980 at the height of the gold market when it was hitting $8.50 an ounce. And in the audience was Walter Bressert. He and his wife invited me over for dinner. I didn't know who he was. He was he was on the board of director of Foundation Study of Cycles. And I wasn't really interested in going to, somebody's house for dinner that I didn't know until his wife said, we have a macrobiotic cook. You might like this, because she knew I was interested in health foods. And of course I was. And I said, that was a deal breaker. So I went to his house. During the dinner, he said, Ray, I'd like to take you back to my office in the back of the house here and show you a chart. He had the chart all across the back wall of his office. It was like a horseshoe-shaped office. It's a chart of gold, daily price of gold. And he said, look at 1974, 1976, 1978, 1980. The high and the low of each of these years was under Mars retrograde and Mars direct. There were 6 of them up until this point. Every one of them was a high and the low of the year when that happened. And I said, wow, that's pretty interesting. And it was happening right then, too, as gold was making its all-time high. This is January 15th, 1980. He says, Ray, if I give you these charts, do you think you could do some research and see if there's other correlations here? And I said, yeah, I'm in. Count me in on this one. So he gave me all those charts. He offered to teach me the study of cycles. So I went around the country to all his conferences. He would give 2 or 3 a year, and I did that for a couple of years. Learn how to look at financial markets from the point of view of cycles. Then I put my research capabilities into looking at these charts and finding out which astrological signatures were present, all these highs and lows of the year, or even intra-year, the minor ones too. And I found 17 correlations that had correspondence to what he called primary cycle tops and bottoms, 17 out of I don't know how many hundreds of aspects I looked at every day of the gold market. And I wrote a book called The Gold Book. It was the first quantitative study ever done on financial markets related to astrology. I sent it to him. He loved it. Now, as I say, it was quantitative studies related to planetary cycles, not sun and moon. There were studies done on the sun and moon to the stock market, but nothing on any market had been done showing a formal quantitative study related to planetary aspects or retrograde and direct. So he was impressed. He sent it to the Financial News Network, where he was a frequent contributor. They called me, invited me to come on their show, Money Talk, and then as a contributor. I went on their show. I had 35 subscribers at the time in 1982. By the end of that show, I had 350. So I had to get a new day job. I had a new day job. I couldn't do 20 consultations of astrology a week anymore. I now had to service 350 people who were subscribing to my daily, weekly, and analysis of gold and silver at that time. So that's the background of it. I think my most notable things with astrology that I've done is community service for 50 years. I introduced evolutionary astrology in 1977. That was the first book in evolutionary astrology that brought that type of thinking into astrology. And then the late 70s, early 80s, I did the book on the gold market. And since I've written several books on the relationship of astrology to financial markets from the point of view of financial market timing.
Wow. We were talking about Robert Glasscock before we started rolling, and he tells a similar story. It's almost like this work found you and called you into it.
Yes. Yeah, I would say that's true, Thomas. I mean, I didn't, go to college with the idea that I was going to end up an astrologer. I didn't go to college with the idea I was going to end up in finance, even though I started in business administration. My degree end up being in psychology. So, when I embarked upon this, it wasn't my intention, it wasn't my vision that I was going to end up defining my life's work through astrology and finances, but that's how it happened. And I couldn't be happier. It's been a very wonderful, exciting journey, meeting very incredible, colorful, brilliant people along the way. I'm just truly grateful for this opportunity to embark upon this path in life.
Your work is as much about cycles as it is astrology or anything else. Was it from these roots that you started to see these repeating patterns that were predictable and then just carried that on?
Well, as you know, astrology, it can stand on its own. But I think the greatest value of astrology to society is that it can apply to any facet of life, any facet of learning, any pathway in life. I mean, you can use astrology to analyze business. You can use astrology to understand the psychological makeup of somebody very much deeper than usual. So the idea of applying astrology to a larger study, if you will, a more broad study of cycles analysis fit. In fact, I think the two are very highly related. To me, the study of astrology is really the study of cycles in the universe related to cycles in human activity. Okay, we have cycles in our human activity, whether it's economics, political, business, health. We have our cycles, relationships, and if we can identify what astrology factors were present at the highs and lows of those cycles, and we can show some kind of a quantitative study, empirical studies, it becomes the basis to support that study. One thing we've lacked in astrology all through the years has been empirical studies. Most of astrology is based upon qualitative studies, case histories. But the reason for that is because most people came into astrology came from the background of the helping professions. They weren't statisticians. I'm not a statistician, but I learned a little bit about it in college. But the idea of empirical studies, giving quantitative backing to your ideas, to your concepts, to your theories based on astrology, just made a lot of sense to me. So as I studied Walter Bresser, and he taught me to recognize studies. I mean, after learning with him, I could look at a chart of a stock market or a commodity market And it looks, now I can see patterns. It's not random to me anymore. I can see important highs and lows from which the market reversed. And I can go back and I can look at what the astrology factors were at that time. Or I go the other way. I can look at what astrology factors, a simple astrological factor like maybe Venus, Uranus, in any kind of a hard aspect, and go back and look at the charts and see, are there common patterns? You can go either way, from the astrology to the market or the market to astrology. And you can do these kinds of tests, these kinds of studies. And so when you ask me cycles related to astrology, I like to apply my knowledge of astrology to the study of cycles more than the other way around. I can do it the other way around, but it makes more sense to me to say, okay, here's the times. These are the cycle highs and lows. These are the times when they're due. In those time bands, what astrology is happening? And what are the astrological factors happening during that time that have a correlation consistently to highs or lows, reversals in the markets in the past? So that's what I've done. And I continue to combine the two studies together, cycles analysis and geocosmic studies. They fit like a hand in a glove. They're very, very compatible to one another.
Here's a question. Wall Street and the financial markets collectively is a big, big business. You've been doing this for a long time, all the way through the 80s, all the way through the 90s, all the way through the 2000s. Are there some closet astrologers out there that follow your work because they get an extra edge?
That's why they use it. Every trader is looking for that extra edge. So it's more in the field of trading than it is in investments. Now, astrology with finances is a marvelous tool, whether you're a long-term investor, even if you're a buy and hold, you want to buy something, you're going to hold it for all of your life. It still makes a difference if you buy it near the low of a long-term cycle than near the high. If I bought the Dow today at 34,000, it's going to give me a lot less return than if I would have bought it during the pandemic when it was 18,000. Okay, it's got up over 100% since then. So it's important if you're a long-term investor to know the general time band when that long-term cycle is due, and you're going to get 100% return over, the next 4 or 5 years, whatever the case may be. So when you ask me about are there closet astrologers on Wall Street, I'll tell you a story. When I started the forecast book, which you did an excellent job of doing an audio book broadcasting for me
Thank you.
year. By the way, everybody should get a copy of that. It's wonderful to hear these ideas instead of just reading them. But back in the 80s, late 80s and 90s, when I was writing this forecast book, it wouldn't be unusual to go to the Board of Trade or the Chicago Mercantile Exchange or the COMEX Exchange in New York City and see a copy of that. There would be people, the floor traders. Back then we had the shout, the barter, the barking system. I forget exactly what they call it, the outcry, where you'd have to, give your price. I want to buy it. I want to sell it at this price. Well, a lot of people, not a lot, but a few of them were basing it on the time bands that I had written, or Jeannie Long, who was, my partner at the time in finances. We were financial partners. She wrote a book too called The Trader's Almanac. And she would indicate a lot of these time bands too. So it wasn't unusual to see traders in the commodities floors or option floors looking at the forecast book or looking at the Trader's Almanac by Jeannie Long. You wouldn't see it on Wall Street too much because they're more investment oriented. But you'd see it in the trading community. So traders loved it because astrology is a timing tool. Market timing gives traders that extra edge that they seek. Investors, they have a whole different psychology. Their idea is it's a fool's errand to try to time the market. But I think we've proven over the last 30 or 40 years, in many cases, that we have been able to predict, I guess the word is. I don't like that word, but it's true. We've been able to predict this is a time and this is a price band when the market is most likely to make a low or a high, and you should be prepared to go the opposite way. We've done that many, many times. In fact, there's many times in between 2010 and 2014, when I would actually give out intraday analysis based on half hour charts and always say, okay, this is a half hour. In this half hour, you want to buy gold when it gets around 1520. And I was very successful with that. From 1520, 1530, it hit there 3 times during between 2011, 2012, and every time went up $200-300. And that really helped my reputation. One other thing that helped my reputation a lot too was the UAC conference, 2008 in Denver. Oil was over $100 a barrel. Nobody had predicted, well, one company had predicted, I think it was maybe Goldman Sachs or Smith Barney predicted some time ago, they expected oil to get to $100 a barrel. Well, it was around $90, $80 a barrel in May of 2008. And everybody was excited, like, crude's going to go to the moon. And I gave a talk called The Coming Green Revolution, based on astrology. And in that talk, I discussed crude oil. That, I think crude oil is going to get to $144 a barrel, give or take $6-7. And it's going to do it in the next couple of months. And it's going to fall 75-90%. Actually, it's 77 to 93%. And sure enough, 2 months later, crude oil topped out $147 and some cents. And by the end of the year, it was down to 30s. It had dropped 78% in a matter of 5 months. That really got my reputation off the ground too, in addition to what I did on the Money Talk show in 1983 and went from 35 subscribers to 350. So it is possible to make a prediction within a short time band and within a tight price range, knowing your cycles, knowing your technical analysis, knowing your astrology. You can make a prediction, and there'll be many, many cases where you'll be right. You're going to be wrong a lot too. You won't hit it. But you're going to hit it a lot, much more so than the talking heads on television who tell you that trying to time the market is a fool's errand. No, it's not. It can be done. It can be done often.
Here's a man who built his whole career on it.
Yeah.
What are you seeing now? Is Wall Street, and you say not Wall Street, but the industry, more interested in astrology now? Has it been growing over the last 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, the biggest growth though was from nothing really in the early 1980s to probably till the turn of the century, to around 2000. It grew very rapidly. It's still growing, but not at the same pace because so many people are aware of it now. But yeah, we continue to get new people coming in all the time. I mean, Bitcoin was very good for it. A lot of your younger market analysts were astrologers with Bitcoin. The millennials, they look at astrology, and they developed quite a niche for themselves on Twitter, maybe Instagram and TikTok. So that brought in a whole new community. The problem is that the ones who came in through Bitcoin, to astrology through Bitcoin, they'd never been through a bear market when they finally got involved, which was mainly, I think they mostly got involved in 2015 after it went to 19,000, it came down to 3,000. Then everybody got involved in it. And when it got to 69,000 November of 2021, everybody was into Bitcoin. And all the financial astrologers, not all, many of them thought this is never going to end. It's going to continue to go. So when it dropped, and we predicted that too, we had that in the forecast book, that Bitcoin would fall 77 to 93%, just like everything else did. They would do it sometime between late 2021 and late 2022. And it did. It fell 78, 79% that year, just recently. But we lost a lot of people. And that turned a lot of people off because they'd never experienced a bear market in Bitcoin. So we lost a lot of young people who were interested in astrology at that point. But there's still a lot of new people that weren't in it prior to 2015, 2016. They're into it now. It's still growing. There's always new people coming into it. We have a lot of intelligent astrologers in our community. They do a lot of good work. There's the opposite too. There's a lot of people make up rules. They go along and say that's based on astrology, and it's not. But there are a number of excellent astrologers looking at financial markets, whether it's Bitcoin, precious metals, currencies, or the stock market, and it continues to grow.
Let's back into this. This is kind of a metals lead-in kind of question, if you wanted to go there. But
okay,
as we're recording this in late January of 2023, there's something in the news that has a metals component, or at least a good metals question buried within it. As you know, these BRICS nations, Russia, India to some degree, China, and Saudi Arabia in particular are trying to figure out a way to trade oil, which you mentioned a minute ago, outside the U.S. dollar.
Yeah.
And some people are saying if they are successful, then the United States dollar could be devalued, perhaps quickly, creating hyperinflation in the United States. I had a friend who I met in 2007-8 period, who was from Zimbabwe, from Rhodesia, and he had lost his life savings in 72 hours.
Whoa.
All of it gone. So if something like that happened, if they are successful in skirting or moving around or stepping aside from the U.S. dollar, would the metals be a good place to be?
Yeah, I think they would be if that were to happen, because any effort, I think, to take the world off the U.S. dollar standard currency would probably have to be backed by something more tangible than the goodwill and faith of the U.S. government. And that would be probably gold, probably silver, maybe some other minerals, I don't know. But I mean, just from a logical point of view, I don't see how you're going to get a competitive currency to the US dollar unless you back it with something tangible and something more meaty, if you will, than just a US good faith and promise to redeem the value of the dollar. I mean, right now, the US dollar is basically a fiat currency, it's paper fiat currency. There's nothing behind it beyond the trust and the goodwill and promise of the US government. And that goodwill, as you know, has been slowly eroding since we've gone off the gold standard. And also since we got off the gold standard, the debt of this country has really it's really escalated parabolically, and there's nothing that I see on the horizon to bring it down. In fact, with interest rates going up, that's going to become a bigger and bigger component of the U.S. debt. So when you talk about other countries like Russia, China, maybe Brazil, India, I mean, if they decide to put out a currency that has a tangible background, tangible assets backing it, and they reduce their own debt, they could do it. Right now, China has a huge debt. Russia, of course, has a huge debt. That's kind of holding them back. But if they do all get together and decide they're going to accept payment for petroleum and for fossil fuels, for crude oil in their currency, that could have a very disabling effect, destabilizing effect, not just on the U.S. currency in the United States, but throughout the world. I think what's more likely to happen if it goes in that direction, you'll have, for some time, you'll have two currencies, two international currency systems. Yes, they may accept payment through non-U.S. dollars for crude oil amongst themselves, but the rest of the world will probably still use U.S. dollars. It's going to take a long time, I think, a lot, to bring the U.S. dollar down, because even though those countries do not trust the United States and its intentions, most of the other countries still trust, let's say they distrust the U.S. less than they distrust the other countries. So part of the feature that's necessary to make a transition from the standard world currency is going to be the trust of whoever is the standard, whatever nation is behind the standard world currency. And right now, the greatest trust or the least amount of distrust is with the United States to handle that position. Now, if you're looking at when these things could happen, well, I think if you look at the second half of this decade, 2025 to 2030, the North Node is going to go into Aquarius and Capricorn. That's an 18-year cycle of worldwide recessions. It has a pretty good record, like 70-some%, I think. So we could see something like that then. And we're also in the last quarter phase of the Saturn-Uranus cycle. And that's all often a destabilizing time. Remember, the last time we were in the last quarter phase was basically 1974, 75, 76 to 1988. And of course, that's when the United States had Watergate. We had the oil embargo that destabilized the world economy at that time. At the end of that period, we had the We had the great crash of 1987, Black Friday, Black Monday, and we also had the downfall, the abolishment of communism. So a lot of things became very destabilized at that time, but it turned out pretty good, because once communism went down, you had 300 million new consumers come into the world. So the big fallout we had from Black Monday, October 19th, 1987, was followed. It was a gradual increase for the next couple of years, and the markets throughout the world just really took off after that, with all those new consumers, because the bottom line is, do you have more buyers and sellers? Are there more consumers who can afford to buy to push that economy forward, even with debt? Well, we've been doing it. We've been doing it for a long time, but now we're reaching a breaking point, I think. And the breaking point is the national debt, the world debt, the consumer debt. They're all at record highs. And I don't know how this is going to be rectified unless the central banks decide to show an act of mercy and create a jubilee moment where they forgive all the countries their debt and start over again. So there is danger of this, but until something better comes along, that the United States is a trustworthy manager of the world standard currency, it's not going to go quickly.
We're not going to go into this in this interview, but it is in the book. One of the most excellent analysis of the Federal Reserve, its origins, where we are with it today, and if there were a jubilee, who should be the forgiver? And we'll just leave it at that, but you did an excellent job on that. That was so enlightening. And anybody who really wants to understand it, we could not do it justice here, but it is a section in the book of several chapters there that combine to analyze that, and it is like top shelf stuff.
They could also get it through the audiobook, because that was one of the chapters you read in the audiobook, and you did an excellent job with it.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what I was kind of implying, is this is the kind of thing. See, the audiobook is designed that it is something that you can listen to while you're driving to work or while you're running your errands. You don't have to be in front of a computer. There are charts and there is a PDF of the charts, but it's something that you can reference later. You don't need it in order to listen to it. And this is not financial astrology. This is a lot more mundane astrology that is extruded or implied to financial astrology. But it really is a comprehensive look at where we are and then what the sky is indicating is likely to happen in this upcoming year.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's talk about the book and the audio book here.
Okay.
The first chapter, and we're just going to hit some highlights because, again, there's so much in here. But I love your little bringing music into this. So the first chapter is entitled "The Signs They're A-Changin', War and Renaissance," from the Bob Dylan 1964 song of the same title. Let me just read the first couple of sentences to how this chapter started. "Something major is happening in the heavens that hasn't happened in a long, long time. The outer planets, those with the longest orbital cycles around the sun, ranging from 84 to 248 years, are each changing signs in the next 2 years. In terms of the global collective psychology, that's big. How big? And what might it portend?" And from there goes Forecast 2023. So you mentioned, in fact, in your last Saturday newsletter, the one that we just did here at the end of January, that you are getting good feedback now from this macro analysis. So let's do a little bit of that together here for the next couple of minutes, and that will give us a preview or at least a look at what this book is really about, the audiobook, of course, too. The one that I'd like to just ask you to bring us up to speed on is one that took place a couple of years ago, and that is the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in December of 2020. But it's something that you reference quite a bit in the book, and it's something that you also refer to in the newsletter. So it obviously is an anchor tenet of what's going on right now. Can you bring us up to speed on that?
That conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn on December 21st, 2020 was a very major geocosmic event. it represented the beginning of a series of Jupiter-Saturn 20-year cycles that will take place in air signs. As you know, Thomas, and maybe some of the listeners know, Jupiter and Saturn come together every 20 years. And for about 200 years, most of those 20-year cycles are in the same element. And then 200 years later, they change to the next element. And they do the same thing. So every 800 years, it comes back to the air element. So we had an air element pilot, if you will, a preliminary bout in 1980. Jupiter, Saturn went to Libra, 80-81, and then went back to Earth again in 2000. And then finally in 2020, it goes back into the air signs. And it's going to be there for the next 140 years. Each Jupiter-Saturn synodic cycle will be in an air sign. Well, this one that happened on December 21st, 2020 is extremely important because it's 0 degrees Aquarius. We've been talking about for the last 50, 60 years, the age of Aquarius, but we haven't really had anything major going on in the sign of Aquarius, really, until now. I mean, yeah, we had transiting Uranus go through it in the late 90s, and that was pretty big. That was the internet revolution. That was a big change. But now we get the Jupiter-Saturn, the great mutation, happening in 0 degrees Aries and starting this 140-year period of synodic cycles and air signs. Why this is so important is because when two planets come together, when they can join the heavens, it supercharges that degree. We call it a supercharged degree. 0 degrees Aquarius is now a supercharged degree, which means any planet that crosses that taps into the themes of this new age, this new era. We call it era, A-I-R-A, a new era, air sign age. So anything that goes around that passes 0 degrees Aquarius is going to touch off this new era. And as you know, Pluto is going to go into Aquarius March 23rd. And it's going to go back and forth 5 times between March 23rd and the end of November 2024. So it's like most of 2 years there, 2023 and 2024. Pluto, the strongest, the longest planetary cycle in our orbit, is going to hit this supercharged degree that kicked off the new era at 0 degrees Aquarius, Jupiter, Saturn. So a lot is going to happen in the next 2 years. If you go back to the last time that Pluto went into Aquarius, by the way, it does it every 248, 250 years. The last time it went into Aquarius was April of 1777. And it was there for 20 years. And you know what happened during that time? We had the American Revolution, the French Revolution. Okay, 2 major world revolutions changed the whole world order at that time. You can also, as that chapter dealt with, go back and look at when Neptune changes sign. Neptune is going to Aries in 2025. The last time it went to Aries was April 13th, 1861, the day before or the day after the Civil War began. And you go back to Uranus going to Gemini. That happens every 84 years. The last time Uranus went to Gemini was in August of 1941. And, you know, within a couple months of that was Pearl Harbor. So here we have the 3 outermost planets all changing signs, going to Aquarius with Pluto, Aries with Neptune, Uranus with Gemini. And the last time each of them did it were the 3 major wars of this country. But here's the difference. As Neptune goes into Aries, Saturn's going to join it in February of 2026. It's going to make a sextile to Uranus and Gemini, Pluto and Aquarius, which are trine to each other. So you got this double sextile formation going on with the 4 outermost planets. And Andre Barbeau, who I think is one of the greatest mundane astrologers ever, had written in one of his books maybe 10, 15 years ago that represents the one time this century that the world has an opportunity to actually act like adults. Great things can happen. We could have a peace happening then. We could have he didn't say renaissance. That would be my word for what he was trying to say. But it can be like a major revolution in communications that changes the culture and how we relate to each other throughout the world. And it's positive. He says that's our last chance to get our act together in this century. So we've got these aspects indicating war. At the same time, we've got these aspects indicating what I call renaissance. So I went back and looked in time. When's the last time you had this kind of a setup where you had 3 major planets, the 3 outermost planets changing signs so close to one another. And it happened a lot between the late 1300s and late 1400s. And that was the Renaissance. That was the peak of the Renaissance, especially 1446 and 1452. There was a couple of times there where they're going back and forth between signs. And that was the heart of the Renaissance. So this is the reason that I'm making this connection, that what's happening in 2023 to 26 has similarities to what happened the last time these planets went into signs, the last time they formed these kinds of aspects to one another. And that deals with major wars involving the United States, but it also deals with major innovations, major discoveries, major revolutions in communications that could be the basis for a renaissance. And so we got both. We're having parallel tracks in our human unfoldment. The arc of humanity is going on parallel tracks. We got one arc of going through destruction, where there's this senseless, brutal killing of one another by invading regimes over sovereign nations. We got this other track, which is continually inventing, innovating, coming up with new discoveries that are improving the life of humanity, and it's very exciting. So my thinking is that in the end, creation, innovation always wins out over destruction. You can only destroy for so long before people say, there's nothing else to destroy. Let's start rebuilding. So I think we're going through the extremes here. We're going through this destruction extreme, and we're going through this creation extreme. And I think the creation is going to win out in the end.
Wow, just incredible. One of the aspects that I have overlaid and studied on top of that fits perfectly is what happened in January of 2020 when Saturn and Pluto aligned in the sky. And you go back to tracing the history of that, the 1284 conjunction kind of closed the parentheses of the Dark Ages, and then the shift began over the next about 75 years into that Renaissance period. And kind of interesting that the last thing that happened in the 1300s before the Renaissance kicked off and launched in Florence was the bubonic plague.
That's right. This
time, the first thing that happened out of the chute after Saturn and Pluto was a plague. So I was I've been watching this. I was like, something big is going to happen. And in late January of 2020, when all of a sudden the World Health Organization declared this thing a pandemic, I was like, oh, so we're starting with it this time.
We know what else happened at that time with Saturn conjunct Pluto, and it got overshadowed because so quickly after came COVID. But within a couple of days of that January 2020 conjunction was the assassination of the Iranian general by the United States. And that's more of a classic example of Saturn and Pluto, where assassination is one of the key phrases that could go with Saturn and Pluto, the elimination of one's enemies. And not only did it happen in Iran, but it happened in other places in the world too, where the leaders are getting rid of their enemies. They continue doing it, and that's the Saturn Pluto, one of the aspects of Saturn and Pluto. But you're absolutely right. When Saturn and Pluto hits in such a major aspect like this, as it did in the 1200s, you get a threat to life, and it can be a threat, a massive threat to life. But it can also be the catalyst that leads us to reform of structures that are getting obsolete, no longer useful, tiresome, and those that can be the seed of a catalyst for revolt and revolution, which of course was followed in this case with Saturn square Uranus, which is probably the most classic revolutionary aspect there is. And what do we notice going on? So Saturn conjunct Pluto followed by Saturn square Uranus. I mean, we just had an explosion of conspiracy theory and this effort by very loud minority voices that grab the podium, they grab the microphone, and it's the extremes that kind of control the narrative going on in the world over the last couple of years. Now, I'm hopeful with Jupiter and Saturn coming together and starting to go into their opening phase on Jupiter starting to separate from Saturn, that you get the positive principles of Jupiter-Saturn, which is going from extremism of the Saturn-Pluto and the Saturn-Uranus. You're going to go from the extremism more toward the moderation, which is where Saturn and Jupiter work out best. Jupiter's too much, Saturn's not enough. So what's the solution? Somewhere in the middle, not too much, not too little. That's what works in the waxing phase of Jupiter-Saturn that we got going on through the rest of this century without the interference of Saturn square Uranus now. So I'm also hopeful in that regard.
I wanted to pick those two apart. Saturn and Uranus occurred in 2021 twice, 2022 once. Yeah. And then we had the Pluto return of the United States in the United States chart, where Pluto hit in 2022, its exact location in the natal chart. Did we skate past those without as much impact as maybe we could have, or are those going to wax out over a much longer period of time, that, you know, in the drive-through mentality that we have now of I want it right now, that we didn't get the big, you know, Pluto return? Is the United States going to fold? Yeah, well, it didn't. We're still here. What's ahead?
But we did have our insurrection, didn't we? There was the attempt to storm the Capitol and to deny the results of the election and to overthrow it and put somebody else in power who didn't legitimately win the election. At least when I say legitimately, I mean, we can't prove it. There was 61, 62 court cases where it was brought to the docket to deny the election results, to consider it fraud, and every one of them failed. So in a sense, we did have a Pluto return. There was an attempt here to overthrow the government that was elected by the people. It almost succeeded. It got right to the point where, had they got a hold of Mike Pence, you know, they might have done him some serious damage. So we had our moment, and you know, you never know for sure what the end result is going to be, because choices can be made. We have the free will, and the choices that were made can determine the outcome. But the possibility of an overthrow of a revolution in this country was real at that time, I think.
And what about Saturn-Uranus? Same aspect was in the Great Depression in 1930.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing about Saturn-Uranus. Anytime you get a major aspect, Saturn to the planets beyond it, those are the longest planetary cycles in our solar system. And if you have a market making all-time highs or multi-year lows, it's usually the end of it. So in 2021, we made all-time highs. In 31 into early 32, we made, you know, multi-year lows. You know, we dropped 89% and it reversed up after that. This one, we made all-time highs, we've come down. Now, and this becomes a dilemma now, is that did the Saturn-Uranus correlate with the all-time high in 2021, actually January 5th, 2022? Most countries topped out in November of 2021. Was that all-time high? Is that the nature of the Saturn-Uranus that's going to hit and we're not going to see those highs again? Or was it the decline we had? We had a pretty good decline. I mean, the biggest decline we've had, well, it's only the biggest decline in 2 years. That's not that big of a decline. It was 22%. The pandemic decline was 38%. But nevertheless, was that the Saturn-Uranus being the 2 years cycle low? Well, I think until proven otherwise, we got to respect the idea that the all-time high happened under Saturn-Uranus, and it was reversal. So what else happened then? Well, after Saturn-Uranus, we went from zero interest rates and very low inflation, suddenly exploded. But that's two things. I mean, that was not only just Saturn-Uranus causing that, that was also Jupiter conjunct Neptune in Pisces. Both of those are inflationary. So our central banks badly misjudge the effect of their policies on inflation. The government at the time badly misjudged their decisions involving fiscal policy. And both of them, the huge stimulus and the huge accommodation by the Federal Reserve, gave us the worst inflation we've had in 40 years. So there are remarkable things that have happened under the Saturn-Uranus that we didn't expect at the time, that our leaders, our experts miscalculated. And we're living with the consequences of that now. And when you ask about the Pluto return and the insurrection, well, that's not resolved yet. I mean, that case is still coming before the public, is still coming before the Department of Justice to litigate, if you will. And the thing about Pluto, when Pluto's in a major aspect of your chart, yes, things happen that you cannot escape. Nobody escapes unscathed, is my rule, when Pluto hits them. And the other part is when Pluto hits you, you may think you escape when it passes. But the thing is, Pluto is like incubation. That's where you committed the acts. You made the decisions, you created the policies, you did the acts, and maybe the consequences didn't become apparent right away. It sometimes takes 1 to 3 years afterwards. It's like, I hate to say it, but like people who get cancer, they don't often know they got cancer. But when they get it, they're under Pluto aspect, but they may not find out about it until 1 to 3 years later that, oh no, I've had cancer and I didn't even know it. So this is the nature of Pluto. It incubates you. You have the problem. You have the issue developing when Pluto is making the aspect. But a lot of times it doesn't become apparent to 1 to 3 years later. So even though we have Pluto return in 2022, its influence will become increasingly more apparent to us in 2023 to 2025, and even to early 2026, as I mentioned in the forecast book.
You could accuse me of blatantly trying to sell books here, but yes, I absolutely am. So if you understand my intention, then we can proceed. Now you understand why I think everybody who is a serious student of astrology and or the markets, but this is not market related. It's much more mundane related. The market part of the audio book was left out. That's in the physical print book that you can order from MMAcycles.com. Why you need to understand this is exactly what we've been talking about, because we could go on for another 5 hours. Oh, wait a minute. Ray already has. It's in the book. And that's why you need to understand these things, because we are talking about major thematic events here. Again, how the book started, something major is happening in the heavens that hasn't happened in a long, long time, with these outer planets changing signs. And Ray picks each one of these apart in detail in the chapters of the book. So that's why I'm so passionate about people getting this in their hands, whether they read it or whether they listen to it. We want them to listen to it, obviously, from my perspective, but this is very valuable and important information. Let me ask you this. We've talked about war. We've talked about economic crises. We've talked about various things that are scary to hear, especially in the uncertainty. Are you concerned for your safety, or do you sleep well at night right now?
At this point, I sleep well. And, my wife lives in Germany. I was a little bit nervous there when winter was coming and Russia threatened to cut off their heating oil supply. That concerned me. Yeah, I mean, I'm worried, but it's still not near enough, I guess, in my life, in most of our lives in the United States. The closest it's come to me, and it has come a little bit close to me, actually, because my wife and I took in a Ukrainian family. My graphic designer was from Ukraine, and when February 24th hit and Russia invaded Ukraine, I called him and said, Andre, if you and your family need shelter, please come to our place in Cologne, Germany. He says, no, Ray, I appreciate it very much, but I want to stay here and defend my country. But my sister has 3 children, and she's really worried. One's just born, is only 2 months old. And you know her, he said to me, and I do know her because she did work for me too. She would really like to take you up on that offer and, take her children to a Cologne and get them to safety so they can be assured of having a decent life in their future. So it became very close to me. And I got to say that having Katerina and her children come from the small village in Ukraine where they were, it was, they could hear the bombs, made it to Warsaw, made it to Berlin, made it to our place by the first week of March. And to live with these people and to see what remarkable, loving parent she is, and her husband too, because they made a rule in Ukraine that if you have 3 more children, we want the fathers to go out of the country and bring up their children so they'll be able to come and fight for us later on if we need them. So the whole family, all 5 of them, moved in with us, and it is just incredible. It made such a big difference in my life. I haven't had quite that intensity of love and appreciation and gratitude in my life in a long, long time, maybe ever. And to witness the bravery that this mother had for her children to get them out of Ukraine and go through Poland, go through Berlin, and make it to our place to safety. And she doesn't expect anything. I mean, all we need to do is give her shelter. She took care of everything after that. They take really good care of us. I mean, they cook every meal. They keep the house clean. They're great conversation, just beautiful people. And so it has become close to me in my life. I'm sorry for her that she can't go back to her homeland at this point in safety for her family, but I'm glad we could provide that safety for her. And of course, I hope and pray that all Americans and everybody else outside of that area is able to maintain safety in this time where there is danger. There's no doubt about it. There is danger in the world. And it's unfortunate that it happens, but there are people who have basically one motive, and that is to maintain their control by whatever means necessary in their mind. They do not want to give up their control. They do not want to give up their power. A huge power fight going on as Pluto goes from Capricorn to Aquarius. I think it is a dangerous time. We need to be cautious. We need a danger. But you know what, Thomas? Really, the age of terrorism has been with us for over 20 years, since 9/11, and that was a Saturn-Pluto opposition. It's not like we're immune to the concept of danger and terrorism. We have it in our country. I mean, you see these senseless killings in schools. You see these senseless killings where gatherings of people happen. You see these senseless killings at religious churches and institutions and synagogues just because of the hate. And that's the dark side of Pluto. You know, Pluto was a god of the underworld. It got what it wanted by kidnapping, by absconding with Demetra, the goddess of at the time by Pluto, by Hades. And so there's a mythology, a theme behind this. We're living it. We may not think that we're in danger, but if we actually watch TV, listen to the news, go to the internet, you see every day there's some kind of a tragedy going on where people's lives are in danger. People are killing people. So, I mean, it hasn't happened in my home directly, but it has happened to a family that I lived with. And so it's there. I'm aware of it. I'm cautious. I think everybody is. I've learned to be cautious since 9/11, and I think most of us have. And I don't know when we're going to escape this, and maybe another 10 years until Saturn conjunct Uranus and it starts going into its waxing phase. But we live in a world of danger, and we live in a world of hope because we also have innovations, discoveries, inventions going on constantly too. So we're living on these parallel tracks, and I try to keep my focus mostly on the ones that I can control. I can't control the danger. I mean, all I can do is try to stay out of dangerous situations. But if I happen to step into it, there's nothing I can do except, you know, use my wits. And I think every one of us have developed that intuition, that awareness of when there's danger around us.
Wow, what a great answer. And that you were in the position to be able to do what you did for that family is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm going to see them next month. I can't wait to see them again. It's been a couple months.
Oh, that's great. Great. Well, listen, tell them you met this audiobook narrator, and he says his kudos as well to them. And
well, you know, I played the beginning of the played the dedication to her.
Yes.
And it moved her so much. I mean, she came to tears to hear you read that dedication. Thomas, what you read in that dedication, what you did, it was powerful. It brought tears to her eyes. It brought tears to my eyes too, and my wife's eyes. It was quite moving the way you read that dedication. Thank you for that.
Thank you. It was from the heart, and that's probably why it had that impact. Hey, speaking of your wife, let's pivot real quick just to talk about the other book that we did this year, Trends 2023, which is primarily written about sun signs in key areas of our life. And I told you, I've got a little idea that we're going to launch here. I kind of wanted to wait until we talked, and we're putting it together. But for the rest of this year, we're going to examine Trends. Tell us what Trends is all about.
Well, my wife, Antonia Langsdorf Merriman, is one of the top astrologers in Germany. I mean, she has a huge profile. She has like a couple 100,000 people following her on YouTube. So she's quite well known. She used to have a TV show with RTL, which is the largest television station in Germany, in Europe, actually. She used to have a show there for 3 to 4 minutes every afternoon, like the People magazine part of RTL. So she knows her astrology. She's really, really good with sun signs and celebrity charts. So she's been writing her sun sign book for a few years now, and but she has a lot of respect for me, thank goodness. And she likes to interview me before she writes that book. So she gets my ideas of what's going on with each of the sun signs based on the far out planets aspecting that sun sign by a whole sign method. By the way, I'm not a big fan of whole sign, but you got to use whole signs when you're doing sun signs astrology. So we analyze each sign in terms of business, in terms of finances, in terms of relationships, in terms of health, and general psychology. Now, I cover the psychology, I cover the business finances. She also adds the psychology. She covers relationships because that's her main thing, love and relationships, and she covers health. And so each chapter has, approximately 20 pages where it analyzes those things, but then she takes a step further. She actually goes into specific periods during the month when it's either challenging or highlighted favorably. And she brings out, what you can do to maximize the favorable periods and what you can do to minimize the challenges and maybe transform them into, positives in your life at each of these periods. So you might get, 8 to 10 periods under each sign of its career, another 8 to 10 under health, another 8 to 10 under relationships that stand out by her analysis. So it's a very interesting book. I think, of course, I'm a bit prejudiced, but I think it's the finest book and the most detailed book that goes into these kinds of analysis of all the sun sign books out there. I'm very proud of her, what she put together. I'm glad to be a contributor to it. And I'm glad to have you have given us an audiobook on it. And I highly recommend it to people if they want to get an idea of what their year is like. And it's not just your sun sign. It also goes into specific dates in each sun sign that stand out and for what reasons they stand out and what you might expect.
And those are the top areas that people typically consult astrology for as well. So you really hit the sweet spot.
Yeah, love and money. Those are two things that most people, health is important too. But we have a joke in astrology. The most common question we get asked by our clients is, when is my boyfriend's wife going to divorce him? Something like that. So
Earth is a slippery place, isn't it?
Inside joke with astrology. Your listeners will appreciate that. And that as an astrologer, you get questions that sort of have that theme to it, but they kind of say it in a nicer way. But it basically comes down to that.
Oh, exactly.
Boyfriend's wife going to divorce him.
So the book is not written in astro speak. It's written in plain English. So you're not saying that these, as you say, these more challenging times, that Saturn is going to square your sun. By the way, let me ask you this. Is this written primarily that we should focus on it from our sun sign or rising sign or both?
Both, but I would give priority to the sun sign because in that sun sign, she's going to pick out specific birth dates. And that would be, of course, based on the sun sign. But yeah, if you want to go the general, definitely the general psychology part more than anything, you could use your ascendant for that as well.
Okay, and then back to that it's written in plain English. So when you're looking at the challenging times, are you talking about squares and oppositions, and then the easier times
squares, oppositions, or hard aspects in conjunction, hard planets in conjunction, like Saturn, mainly Saturn, Uranus. Well, I guess all the major aspects would be hard. Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, they can all have challenging ways they can manifest. But basically, we're looking at the aspects, the squares, oppositions, or challenges. The conjunctions could be both. It'll be both. It could be positive, could be negative, could be challenging, could be favorable.
And then the easier times would be the sextiles and the trines.
That's correct. Or maybe the Jupiter transits in conjunction.
Well, now our book club has a head start.
There you go.
It was so well written. Here's the deal. The book is so well done without astrospeak that I thought a great little exercise for our podcast listeners who were interested in doing this was to take on, and because it's written through the year, obviously we're following the signs, that we would form a book club and dissect what was going on in the charts that led to why you wrote what you wrote, which is so cleverly disguised in plain English.
Well, a little bit of a hint here. Antonia uses Chiron in Lilith a lot. So as you dissect it, and it doesn't seem to make sense with Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, check out Lilith by transit or Chiron, because she uses that a lot in her work.
Okay. All right. Well, and that'll be a great lesson on both of those, because often those are kind of mystical for so many of us. Well,
True.
I'm looking forward to that, and we're going to stir it up this year with Trends 2023. So I'm glad that we did that, and we're going to have some continued ongoing fun for the whole year. And that will be something that people can jump in anytime. If they're only hearing this and it's May or June or July, come on and join us, because we're going to be having a party for the whole year around that book. It's going to be fun.
That's excellent. Good.
Ray, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. This has been so interesting, and thank you for letting me express your work on a weekly basis from just reading the MMA Cycles newsletter on Saturdays.
Well, you're very welcome, Thomas, and I'm very grateful for the work you're doing, the support you give us. Thank you so much.
All right. Good to have you with us, and
All right.
blessings for a great year, too.
Yes, you too, Thomas.
Once again, the books are Forecast 2023 and Trends 2023, available on Audible without a subscription and Apple Books. We'll be back with the regular newsletter next week. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the weekend, or whenever you're listening to this. Thank you so much for stopping by, and we'll see you on Monday with another week ahead on the Fun Astrology Podcast.